I think about reviewing a classic or doing a video about a classic on my YouTube channel, I start to feel a lot of pressure to do a very comprehensive review. I feel like I need to talk about all of the themes, all of the best quotes, all of the life of the author or the context of the time period in which it was written. And all of these things stress me out and make me not want to talk about classics on my channel. Maybe there's something linked in my brain after years and years of school and then an English degree. Maybe there's something linked in my brain that says, classic, do a lot of research. I think another huge factor is, I don't want people to watch this video and think, oh, she didn't mention the most important part. She's clearly an idiot. She didn't mention this, she didn't mention that. She doesn't understand classics. And that really bothers me because no review that I can make, even a 2-hour mega review, will ever cover all of my thoughts on a book, will ever cover all of the different angles and facets that you could look at for a book. So this huge intro is just to say that I want to start talking about some books on my channel without the pressure of feeling that I need to summarize everything and talk about every different angle. I'm just gonna give you some of my thoughts on The Catcher in the Rye. This video is dedicated to my patrons on Patreon. Every other month they vote for a book for me to read. I take a photo of a few of the things I'm currently interested in. This month period it was classics, and they all voted that I read The Catcher in the Rye. So this one goes out to you patrons. If you're interested in looking into my Patreon page, link down below. The first thing that struck me about it, and strikes me about almost every classic that I read, is how easy it was to read. This is the stream, kind of a stream of consciousness sort of account of a kid over like 2 or 3 days. And he's 17 and he's just telling what happened. It's very straightforward, therefore very engaging, very easy to follow, very easy to put down and pick back up. If you've not read The Catcher in the Rye, I recommend it. I thought it was very funny. Let's talk about this for a second. It was hilarious. This book was hilarious. So if you haven't read it, I do recommend it. The rest of this video is gonna be spoilery thoughts, I guess. There isn't much to spoil about this plot, but if you want to click away, this is the moment. So let's talk about Holden. Let's talk about Holden Caulfield. One of the just jerkiest characters. What a jerk. What a jerk. Holden is such an unreliable character. The way he drops information so flippantly is unnerving. The way he repeats things is irritating. He repeats certain catchphrases over and over. Things like, that kills me, or to tell you the truth. Things like these little speech beats that he adds into his rhythm. It builds rhythm, it builds momentum in the writing, and I liked it. But for Holden, it just builds such an irritating character. So the thing about Holden Caulfield was that I hated him. But I loved reading him. I loved reading his character, so I kind of love Holden, but also he's a terrible person. He is quite misogynistic at points, quite sexist at points, and I don't think we should forgive that. But he is also awful to other men. He's just awful to everyone. He's also very intrusive. He asks very personal questions from strangers, from friends. He intrudes in personal space, he intrudes in places that he shouldn't be, but he doesn't allow people to do that back. He doesn't answer personal questions. He doesn't like to kind of give up personal information, but he expects it from everyone else. One of the most interesting things about his narration is I found an interesting relationship between telling and showing. So it's like a classic thing that writers always say, like a successful writer shows what's going on. They don't tell us what's going on. But with that relationship, it was interesting because, I mean, props to J.D. Salinger. I honestly don't know how he did it. We were watching a scene unfold, and then we were hearing Holden telling us about the scene, and you could automatically see that what he was saying was false. And again, he's a hypocrite. He's a huge hypocrite. There's little moments in the book like him hating the movies. He goes on and on constantly. It appears constantly that he hates the movies. He thinks they're the lowest form of entertainment. But what does he do when he's bored? He goes and watches a movie. So he's so hypocritical in his behavior. But it's why he's interesting, right? He's so flawed. He is so flawed. But it's addictive to read about it. One thing I will kind of, I don't know, compliment Holden on, I don't know if I want to compliment Holden, but I've never met anyone named Holden, or even heard of anyone named Holden, apart from Holden Caulfield. Is that like, was that a popular name in the 40s? I wonder. One thing I do think he does very successfully, well, J.D. Salinger uses him to do, is to show us facades. So there's this moment where he goes to like a bar and he runs into a person he knows and she introduces him to the person that she's currently with, and it says, "The Navy guy and I told each other we were glad to have met each other," which always kills me. I'm always saying glad to have met you to somebody I'm not at all glad I met. If you want to stay alive, you have to say that stuff though. And it's so true, right? There's these facades in society that Holden is constantly pointing out. All of these fake things we all do, these things we all say, that he is working against and making us realize, yeah, that is really fake. But on that point, let's talk about Holden's most blaring and important, I guess, I don't know, quality. And that is his hatred of phoniness, his hatred of things non-authentic. It is so, I think, telling of a young teenager who thinks everything should be a certain way, loves judging everybody, and thinking that he is the superior voice, the superior mind, the superior thought process to everyone around, and constantly is calling everybody phony, and it's useless. It's useless because it doesn't matter. What joy does it bring you? How does it enhance your life to just constantly be judging everybody, to be making judgment calls on what they're doing? It doesn't assist you anything, which I guess brings me to the most important part. Well, it's not the most important, clearly it's not, there's no such thing, but it really, to me, the kind of climax point of the novel, if I can ever find it. He's speaking with his sister Phoebe, and she says, "You don't like anything that's happening." It made me even more depressed when she said that. Yes I do, sure I do, blah blah blah. You don't like any schools, you don't like a million things, you don't. And he keeps countering, he keeps saying, of course I do like things. And then she says, fine, just name one thing, and he says, the trouble was I couldn't concentrate too hot. Sometimes it's hard to concentrate. And he's just making up all these excuses to admit, like, to not admit that he can't think of a thing that he's passionate about. All conclusion of this video is that this is, in my opinion, a young adult novel. This is a story about a teenage boy who's full of himself, a teenage boy who thinks he understands what's important in life, which is judging everybody else and pointing out phoniness, when in actuality he's completely missing the point. He's completely missing the point, which is to just find satisfaction in yourself. Reading this, I saw so many of the themes that are currently so present in young adult fiction, growing up, trying to be independent, trying to figure out what your morals are, what your values are, trying to figure out your purpose, your path. It's about identity, right? It's about a teenager who doesn't know what he wants to do yet. And that to me is a young adult novel. Just because it wasn't written at the time when young adult is now a section in the bookstore doesn't make this not young adult. It totally is. It can be other things too, but it's totally young adult. Finally, I just wanted to throw in some thoughts on what I think the title of the book means. One of my favorite moments in movies, in books, in songs, in just anything, in any art or medium, is when the title of the work is shown in the work, because it's so exciting, right? You're like, why is this called The Catcher in the Rye? Because the whole time I was reading, I didn't understand. And so it's a reference to a song, a little like nursery rhyme, and I think this is interesting, an interesting part about classics and history. A lot of the references here don't make sense to me. What do I know about the day-to-day life of teenagers in the 40s? Not enough to know what their nursery rhymes are. It's like the way that you watch maybe a 90s this for my generation, but you watch a show from the 90s and a lot of the references don't make sense to you because they're referencing things from the 80s and from the 70s, which is a time period I did not exist in. So Maybe this would, the title would have meant more to me more quickly had I read this at the time when it was published, but eventually we find out that it's based on a song that he's singing incorrectly. It's supposed to be something else, not catch, meet. Like you meet other people in the rye. But he translates it to the catcher in the rye. I keep picturing all these little kids playing some game in this big field of rye and all. Thousands of little kids and nobody's around. Nobody big, I mean, except me. And I'm standing on the edge of some crazy cliff. What I have to do, I have to catch everybody if they start to go over the cliff. I mean, if they're running and they don't look where they're going, I have to come out of somewhere and catch them. That's all I'll do all day. I'd just be the catcher in the rye and all. I know it's crazy, but that's the only thing I'd really like to do. I know it's crazy. So this, to me, I loved it. I loved it. First of all, I was like, yeah, so exciting with the title revealed. But more than that, I thought it was perfect. It's a perfect title for this book. Holden wants to be the savior, first of all. He wants to be the only adult around. He feels like he's the only proper adult, the only intelligent one around. So like he says in this vision that he sees, he's the adult in the situation. He's the moral compass. He's the one who's in charge. Secondly, he is the savior of innocence. We know that tragically his brother has passed away. We see how much he cares about his little sister and how all of his interactions with other children are quite positive. Well, not like his fellow peers of teenagers, but I mean like whenever he interacts with a little kid is like a positive thing. When he goes to the school, he sees graffiti and it makes him very sad because he wants to protect the innocence of the children there. So we see him as this guy who's very struggling with kind of a depression and how he wants to protect the innocent. And then thirdly, what is signified by the cliff, right? It's kind of that idea of taking the plunge into adulthood. So you have Holden right in the middle. You have Holden between childhood and clinging on to childhood, catching children, desperately saving children. And then this abyss of what it actually is to be an adult. It's the perfect title. It's the perfect metaphor. Because we see it constantly throughout the novel. The moment you read what the title's about, you immediately think of all of these different moments where there's been that duality. The numerous times when he's at a bar and they won't serve him alcohol and he has to have Coke instead. The trouble of having to rely on his parents and his sister for money because he's not an independent person yet. He doesn't make money. All of these moments where he's torn between being an adult and being a child. That's why this is a young adult novel. That's why this novel is really, really good. And I'll be thinking about it for a long time. So that is a huge video. That is a long video on some of my thoughts on The Catcher in the Rye. Like I wanted to say, these are not all of my thoughts on The Catcher in the Rye. These are not all of the interesting things that there are to think about in The Catcher in the Rye. I don't want this to be that. These are just some of my thoughts. And I hope you found them interesting. I honestly just had a lot of fun making this video and shooting out a bunch of my thoughts. So I'd love down below to hear your opinions. I know that this is quite a, what is that word? Polarized, that's the word, book. I know a lot of people love it, revere it, think it's one of the best. But then I also know that there's a lot of people that dislike this book. Don't see why people like this at all. So I'd love to hear, regardless, what your thoughts were, if you have any opinions on the things I've said today. And yeah, I hope, genuinely hope that you guys enjoy this video. I'll see you in my next one. Okay, bye! I am here today to recommend some movies specifically about writers and writing.